Imagine a scenario that basically wakes chief information officers up in a cold sweat. So it's peak operating hours on the final Friday of the fiscal quarter, and your entire enterprise network, the actual central nervous system of your global operations, just suddenly goes completely dark.
Oh, yeah. That is the absolute nightmare right there. I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars are just bleeding out of the organization every single minute it's down.
Exactly, yeah. Your global supply chain logistics portals are halted, freight is frozen at international borders, and your customer-facing databases are totally dead. They're just, throwing timeout errors to your most valuable clients.
And meanwhile, the executive board is literally standing in your office demanding answers immediately.
Right, and the variables are just seemingly infinite. I mean, are you dealing with a severed fiber optic backbone cable buried in the street outside your headquarters?
Or, has a malicious actor deployed a rogue DHCP server on a remote floor, just systematically handing out invalid IP addresses to intercept corporate traffic.
Or is it simply a sudden, catastrophic internal network choke point? Like a bottleneck that's crippling the entire switching fabric under the sheer weight of its own data. The tension in that moment is absolute, and guessing is definitely not a viable corporate strategy.
No, absolutely not. I mean, that environment separates reactive management from proactive leadership. When the infrastructure collapses, that ticking clock isn't just measuring downtime.
Right, it's measuring capital depreciation and reputational damage.
Exactly. And potential compliance liabilities, too. Having the framework to systematically isolate the variable that caused the collapse is, well, it's the single most critical capability an IT organization can possess.
And securing that capability is exactly why we are here today. So to ensure you possess the operational frameworks necessary to maintain a competitive edge in this hyper-connected marketplace, and to guarantee you're never caught off guard by infrastructure failures, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this deep dive.
Yeah, and please check the description below. We've made a vast repository of corporate resources, detailed architecture diagrams, and essential technical reading available to help you really bulletproof your enterprise operations.
Because, you need to transition those abstract theories into concrete operational directives. And that brings us to where we are right now.
Right. We are actually concluding our long-term strategic analysis today. This is Chapter 15, Network Troubleshooting, which marks the 15th and final chapter of our comprehensive 15-part architectural series.
It's been quite a journey. And just to briefly recap, our previous discussion in Chapter 14 laid the foundation for network security.
Right. We analyzed the mathematics of risk assessments, the implementation of rigorous access controls, and, the absolute necessity of multi-layered defense-in-depth security architectures.
We basically established the protocols for hardening the perimeter and locking the internal blast doors. But today we are confronting the reality of operational degradation.
Yeah, we're bridging those academic networking principles with high-level corporate decision-making. We're supplying the executive suite with the precise diagnostic frameworks required to confidently oversee enterprise infrastructure recovery efforts.
Because we're elevating troubleshooting from just a technical chore handled by the help desk into a highly structured executive strategy.
Exactly. And if we intend to direct that resolution process with actual authority, we have to start by analyzing the command center itself. I mean, the NOC.
Right, the Network Operations Center. You hear that term utilized heavily in corporate literature.
You do, yeah. But the popular perception often defaults to this, like cinematic interpretation. A darkened room with massive wall-to-wall monitors displaying glowing global maps.
Oh, yeah, and scrolling lines of hexadecimal code everywhere, like a movie hacker scene.
Right, exactly. And while the visualization data might look somewhat similar in practice, defining the NOC merely by its physical footprint completely misunderstands its strategic role.
So how should an executive actually define it? Because it's not just a fancy room.
No, the visual aesthetic is completely secondary to the functional mandate. A network operations center is a strategic asset requiring continuous, unbroken capital investment to support 24/7, 365-day active network monitoring.
It's the beating heart of enterprise availability.
Exactly. The NOC is not merely watching for localized hardware failures. It's actively managing the statistical realities of the network's performance. Consider SLA management, for example.
Ah, right. Service level agreements. Those are massive.
Huge. An SLA is not just some loose guideline. It is a legally binding contract between the IT organization, whether that's an internal division or an outsourced managed service provider, and the business units.
Dictating technical support response times and minimum system availability thresholds. And those thresholds usually dictate, nines of availability.
Right, like 99.99% uptime, which leaves almost zero margin for error over a calendar year.
Yeah, practically none. And the NOC operates as the enforcer of those contracts, right?
Precisely. If a critical wide area network link goes down, the SLA dictates the exact escalation path and the allower time window for restoration.
Before severe financial penalties are incurred, or before business units can legally claim a breach of contract.
Right, but beyond enforcing contracts when things break, the NOC is also responsible for anticipating when things will break due to pure volume.
Like capacity planning.
Exactly. Capacity planning directly bridges the gap between the networking hardware and the overarching corporate strategy. It basically renders network engineering indistinguishable from long-term business planning.
Because you're monitoring bandwidth consumption and establishing historical utilization baselines, right?
Yes, and mathematically forecasting the necessity to scale circuit costs based on projected corporate growth.
I mean, consider a scenario where the executive board authorizes the acquisition of a regional competitor or mandates the global rollout of a massive cloud-based ERP system.
Oh yeah. The NOC has to analyze the projected data payloads, evaluate the existing wide area network architecture, and probably determine that the current telecommunications links will face total saturation upon deployment.
Right. They must initiate the procurement of higher capacity circuits months in advance of the actual rollout.
Because capacity planning prevents self-inflicted operational paralysis.
That proactive scaling is so crucial. But inevitably, external variables intervene. The NOC is also responsible for managing telecommunications providers and third-party vendors.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if a construction crew severs a main conduit outside your facility, your internal network engineers can't just deploy heavy machinery to repair municipal infrastructure.
No, they can't just go out there with a backhoe.
Right. So the NOC assumes control of escalating the incident with the external service provider. They navigate the vendor's internal hierarchy and manage the repair timeline to ensure it aligns with the enterprise's SLA requirements.
And that entire operation relies on an incredibly rigid incident resolution workflow. The moment a disruption occurs, a trouble ticket is generated.
Yes. And the protocol dictates that the absolute first step any staff member takes is to interview the user who reported the anomaly.
Which, often frustrates technical personnel. They just want immediate access to the routing hardware to fix it.
I know, it's a common complaint.
No.
But interviewing the user is a non-negotiable mathematical necessity. You have to isolate the variables of the failure.
The objective is to establish the baseline symptoms of the problem from the perspective of that specific endpoint.
Exactly. An engineer needs to know exactly what the user was attempting to execute, the precise alphanumeric error code displayed, the exact timestamp of the failure, and, whether the issue is isolated to a single application or encompasses all network connectivity.
You simply cannot initiate a diagnostic protocol without a rigorously defined problem statement.
No, proceeding without endpoint telemetry is essentially guessing. And guessing extends the downtime significantly.
I always map this workflow to the concept of medical triage in a trauma center. It really clarifies why IT support is structured in hierarchical tiers, from level 1 through level 4.
That's a great analogy. Level 1 is the intake nurse.
Right. They measure the blood pressure, document the visible symptoms, and isolate the immediate location of the pain. They are the IT service desk, capturing the initial data and filtering out fundamental user errors.
Because you do not bypass the intake nurse and wheel every patient directly to a neurosurgeon for a simple headache.
Exactly. Routing a routine password reset or like a disconnected localized printer to a senior level 3 network architect is a catastrophic misallocation of highly expensive corporate capital.
It really is. The triage system protects the organization's most valuable intellectual resources for the most critical architectural emergencies.
So if level 1 cannot resolve the issue, the ticket, which now contains verified endpoint telemetry, is escalated to level 2 systems administrators.
Right, and subsequently to level 3 senior network engineers who manage the core routing and switching infrastructure.
And then level 4 represents a distinct escalation threshold.
Yes. At level 4, the NOC director determines that the complexity of the application layer failure exceeds internal capabilities. So they recommend retaining an external subject matter expert, or maybe the original software vendor, to assist with resolution.
Okay, so I look at this established workflow and specifically at the underlying methodology engineers are supposed to use once they get their hands on a complex ticket. The standard mandate is a strict sequential process of elimination using the OSI model.
The Open Systems Interconnection model, yes, working strictly from the bottom up.
But frankly, if our multi-million-dollar cloud CRM suddenly stops rendering database queries, my senior engineers are not going to start their investigation by walking into the server room to check the physical fiber optic cables in the floor.
Well, they probably want to jump straight in, yeah.
Yeah. Right. They're going to dive straight into the application logs and database performance metrics. So, are we actually suggesting that enterprise teams must start at layer 1 every single time? Or is the OSI model just an academic framework that gets abandoned in a real crisis?
I get why people think that, but bypassing the foundational layers of the OSI model is a fatal managerial error. It routinely transforms minor localized outages into multi-day diagnostic disasters.
Really? Just by skipping ahead?
Absolutely. The OSI model is not just an academic suggestion. It is the physical and logical reality of how digital information traverses a medium. I mean, an engineer can easily spend 6 hours debugging application code, analyzing SQL query timeouts, and attempting to decipher encrypted application logs.
Only to discover what?
Only to discover that the primary server rack lost physical power or a core switch was inadvertently disconnected during routine maintenance.
Wow. Okay, so skipping layers guarantees you will eventually end up chasing ghosts in the software when the hardware is actually dead.
Precisely. The discipline is improving the foundation is solid before you start looking at the roof.
Okay, let's physically map out this layer-by-layer diagnostic process, beginning with the absolute foundation. The physical layer, layer 1.
Right, layer 1 constitutes the tangible components of the network architecture. We're evaluating the copper wiring, the fiber optic glass strands, the radio frequency spectrum for wireless access, and of course the fundamental electrical power distribution.
So troubleshooting at this layer is binary. The engineer must verify if electrical current is flowing, if a cable has been physically severed by heavy machinery, or if a transceiver has burned out.
Exactly. Because if layer 1 fails, network availability is zero. The upper layers simply cannot compensate for a lack of a physical transmission medium.
Okay, so once we mathematically prove the electricity is on and the cables are intact, the investigation moves up to the data link layer 2. What specific mechanical thresholds are we evaluating here to prove the devices can actually communicate?
At layer 2, specifically within wired local area networks, the engineer is validating link integrity. That's between the endpoint's Ethernet Network Interface Controller, the NIC, and the port on the enterprise Ethernet switch it connects to.
And link integrity is achieved through hardware-level auto-negotiation, right?
Yes. The two devices send electrical pulses to each other to agree on a transmission speed, like 1 gigabit per second, and a duplex mode, typically full duplex, which allows simultaneous transmission and reception.
And the link integrity LEDs on the actual hardware provide the immediate physical evidence of this negotiation, like a solid green light indicates the hardware has successfully established the framing parameters at layer 2.
Exactly. And if that light is dark, you have a physical framing failure. The devices literally do not recognize each other's electrical signaling.
So a dark link light immediately terminates any need to investigate software configurations.
Exactly. You stop right there. However, assuming link integrity is established, the diagnostic process ascends to layer 3, the network layer. This is the domain of logical routing and the Internet Protocol, or IP.
So an engineer will typically initiate a ping command at this stage.
Yes, but the ping must be directed strategically. First, they ping the local loopback address to ensure the device's own TCP/IP stack is functioning.
And then, more importantly, they ping the IP default gateway router.
Right, because the default gateway is the exit door to the rest of the enterprise and the Internet. If you cannot reach the gateway, you are trapped in your own local subnet.
The engineer must also verify the AMC addresses, right? Like, are they correctly dynamically mapped to the IP addresses within the ARP cache table?
Yes, the Address Resolution Protocol. We'll explore the mechanics of ARP in depth a little later, but fundamentally, if Layer 3 is compromised, the traffic possesses no logical direction.
The data packets have no understanding of how to navigate the complex maze of enterprise routers to reach their ultimate destination network.
Right. The routing tables will essentially just discard the packets as unroutable.
Okay, so we use ping to prove that the routers know exactly how to transport the data to the destination server. The roads are entirely open. But what if the user still cannot access the critical database application?
Well, if the routing is perfect and the cables are perfect, but the software fails, This proves the failure isn't in the transportation network. It's in the rules of engagement between the two host machines.
And that forces the investigation up to layer 4, the transport layer.
Exactly. And here, the sources heavily emphasize the critical distinction between two specific protocols, UDP and TCP.
That distinction really dictates how applications survive network latency and packet loss. Let's start with UDP, the User Datagram Protocol.
Sure. UDP operates as a connectionless transport mechanism. It utilizes a best effort delivery model.
Meaning it does not establish a formal connection, right?
Correct. It doesn't utilize sequence numbering to track packets, and it offers absolutely no built-in acknowledgments. The protocol simply transmits the datagrams onto the network as rapidly as possible.
So it is highly efficient for applications where raw speed is prioritized over perfect accuracy, like live voice over IP phone calls or corporate video streaming.
Yes, because if a single UDP packet containing a fraction of a second of audio drops, the user might hear a slight click, but the conversation just continues in real time.
Right. Pausing a live phone call to request a retransmission of a lost packet from 2 seconds ago would completely destroy the flow of communication. UDP just accepts the loss to maintain the speed.
Exactly. But TCP, the Transmission Control Protocol, is a complete antithesis of that approach.
TCP is strictly connection-oriented and mathematically guarantees end-to-end packet delivery.
Yes, before a single byte of application payload is ever transmitted, TCP forces the source and destination machines to execute a rigorous three-way handshake.
Let's break that down. The client sends a synchronize, or SYN, packet.
Right, and the server responds with a synchronized acknowledgement, or SYN-ACK packet.
And finally, the client finalizes the connection with an acknowledgement, or ACK, packet. This handshake validates that a reliable bidirectional communication channel exists. It establishes the rules before the game begins.
Furthermore, TCP assigns a unique sequence number to every single packet. This allows the receiving machine to reassemble the data in the exact correct order, regardless of which physical path the packets actually took through the network routers.
And if a packet goes missing?
TCP identifies a missing sequence number and demands a retransmission. It also utilizes windowing to control the flow of data, ensuring a fast sender doesn't completely overwhelm a slow receiver.
This level of mechanical tracking is exactly why loading a secure web page or transferring a massive financial database file relies entirely on TCP. If you lose a single packet in an encrypted payroll file, the entire file is corrupted.
Right, TCP prevents that corruption. Therefore, troubleshooting a layer 4 issue means analyzing these specific handshakes.
For example, if the firewall is suddenly configured to block the SYN-ACK return packets, the TCP connection will hang indefinitely.
Yes, and the application will eventually generate a timeout error, even though the underlying layer 3 IP routing is functioning flawlessly.
So identifying these microscopic failures requires significant investment in specialized hardware and software. Intuition is pretty much useless against a dropped sequence number.
Completely useless. The executive suite must provision the NOC with a comprehensive diagnostic toolkit, beginning with the physical instruments required to certify Layer 1 integrity.
Which is a baseline management responsibility. For the copper infrastructure like the unshielded twisted pair cables running through the walls and ceilings, the primary instrument is a specialized cable tester, right?
Yes, and this is far more advanced than a simple continuity checker. A true enterprise cable tester validates the exact pin configurations to ensure the transmit and receive wires aren't crossed.
And it measures the physical length of the run to ensure it doesn't exceed the 100-meter limitation for standard Ethernet.
Exactly. It tests the termination quality at the keystones, and crucially, it injects signals to certify that the copper can actually sustain high-frequency gigabit or 10 gigabit signaling.
Without excessive electromagnetic interference or crosstalk degrading the signal. But the testing methodology shifts entirely when managing the fiber optic backbone, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. You cannot test glass with electrical pulses. The NOC requires an optical time division reflectometer or an OTDR.
We really need to explain the physics of how an OTDR actually maps a microscopic flaw in a strand of glass buried 3 feet underground. It sounds like science fiction.
It's actually brilliant. An OTDR operates on the principle of Rayleigh backscattering and of Fresnel reflection. The device injects a massive series of high-intensity laser light pulses into one end of the fiber optic cable.
Okay, so it shoots a laser down the tube.
Right, and as the light travels down the incredibly thin glass core, microscopic impurities in the glass naturally scatter a minute fraction of the light back toward the source.
It's bouncing light back.
Yes. The OTDR captures this returning scattered light and measures its precise intensity and the time it took to return.
And because the speed of light through that specific refractive index of glass is a known constant, the OTDR can calculate distance with terrifying precision.
Exactly. If a backhoe scratches the cable or completely severs it, the sudden change in the refractive index at the break causes a massive spike in reflected light, a Fresnel reflection.
And the OTDR plots this data on a graph, instantly pinpointing that a catastrophic cut exists exactly, say, 4.32 kilometers down the conduit.
Right. The NOC can then dispatch the repair crew to the exact GPS coordinates of the failure, which eliminates days of manual inspection.
Establishing the physical viability of the pathways is just the first step. The second step is analyzing the volumetric flow of data across those pathways, and this requires a precise understanding of network performance monitoring metrics.
Yes. In executive boardrooms, the terms bandwidth and throughput are frequently used interchangeably, which frankly leads to massive misallocations of capital.
Yeah.
We really need to define the operational reality of these terms.
Let's do it. Bandwidth is the absolute, theoretical, maximum data transmission speed that a specific physical or logical connection can support.
Right. Bandwidth is a static capacity measurement. Throughput represents the dynamic reality. Throughput is the actual volume of data that is successfully being transmitted and received across that communication link at any given microsecond.
Usually measured in bits per second. I often conceptualize this using a supply chain logistics analogy rather than the standard plumbing metaphor.
Oh, I like that. How does that work?
Well, consider bandwidth as a newly constructed 10-lane superhighway connecting your manufacturing plant to the primary distribution hub. The highway has the theoretical capacity to support thousands of trucks per hour. That is your bandwidth.
Right.
But throughput is the actual number of freight trucks currently driving on the asphalt at 2:00 p.m. on a Tuesday.
That's a perfect analogy. And the distinction becomes critical when calculating network utilization. Utilization is the mathematical expression of throughput as a percentage of total bandwidth over a specific time interval.
So, if your telecommunications provider provisions a dedicated 1 gigabit per second fiber link, and your current throughput is measuring at 250 megabits per second, your network utilization is precisely 25%.
Exactly. And understanding that percentage allows us to identify the most dangerous phenomenon in enterprise networking, the choke point.
Let's return to the highway analogy for that. You paid the telecommunications provider millions to upgrade your external internet connection to a 10-lane superhighway. You have massive bandwidth.
Right, but the internal enterprise router that connects that highway to your internal corporate network is operating on outdated hardware. It's basically acting like a single-lane toll booth.
And that disparity in processing capability is the definition of a network choke point. The external data arrives at the router at 10 gigabits per second, but the internal switching fabric's backplane capacity, or buffer memory, can only process data at 1 gigabit per second.
Right, so the router's buffers instantly overflow, and the hardware begins discarding thousands of data packets. Purchasing a 20-lane highway from your ISP accomplishes absolutely nothing if you do not upgrade the internal toll booth.
The traffic jam simply increases in scale. The only methodology for an executive to proactively identify these architectural choke points before they induce a systemic failure is through rigorous baselining.
Yes, the sources heavily emphasize baselining as a core NOC function, but we really need to define the mathematical mechanics behind it.
Right, what exactly is a baseline?
A baseline is a statistical map of normalized network traffic patterns and behavioral characteristics gathered over an extended period. The network is never static. Utilization fluctuates dramatically based on the time of day, day of the week, and, the end-of-month financial reporting cycles.
So the NOC deploys software to monitor these fluctuations, calculating the mean utilization and establishing standard deviations for every segment of the network infrastructure.
Exactly. Baselining acts as a sophisticated statistical threshold.
Because without a baseline, setting a static alarm to trigger whenever utilization hits 80% is pretty much pointless. 80% might be the completely normal operational reality every morning at 9:00 a.m. when 5,000 employees simultaneously authenticate against the servers.
Right, an alarm going off every single morning is just white noise that engineers will quickly learn to ignore. A baseline replaces static thresholds with dynamic intelligence.
Because the system knows the historical baseline for Tuesday at 3:00 a.m. is, say, 4% utilization.
So a sudden spike to 65% utilization at that exact time triggers a critical anomaly alert. The baseline allows the NOC to differentiate between legitimate business volume and a potential data exfiltration event, or maybe a runaway backup process.
And to harvest this telemetry, the NOC leverages specific software platforms. The sources highlight robust open source solutions like OpenNMS, Nagios, and Spiceworks Connectivity Dashboard.
Which offer deep customization for engineering teams willing to write the integration scripts.
But conversely, licensed commercial platforms like PRTG offer comprehensive pre-configured sensor arrays and executive dashboard reporting right out of the box. But monitoring passive data isn't enough for true capacity planning, is it?
No, not at all. The NOC must actively stress the infrastructure. This introduces network traffic generation tools, such as iPerf and Packet Sender.
So traffic generation is the ultimate proactive diagnostic.
Exactly. Instead of waiting for a critical business day to discover that a newly installed firewall introduces severe latency, the engineering team schedules a maintenance window over the weekend. They utilize iPerf to synthetically generate a massive, sustained flood of TCP and UDP packets.
Artificially saturating the WAN and LAN links.
Yes, they deliberately push the infrastructure to its breaking point in a controlled environment to map exactly where the buffers overflow and the choke points materialize.
And that allows the executive team to authorize targeted hardware upgrades before the users ever experience a degradation in service. However, passive monitoring and synthetic stress testing represent only half of the software equation. When a live incident is occurring, the NOC must actively interrogate the network architecture to isolate the failure. This transitions our analysis to the utilization of connectivity, scanning, and vulnerability assessment tools.
Let's return to the ping command and explore the exact mechanisms occurring beneath the surface.
Because ping is not merely asking a server if it is online. It is a highly specific interrogation protocol utilizing the Internet Control Message Protocol, or ICMP.
Right, and ICMP operates alongside IP at layer 3. When an engineer executes a ping command against a target IP address, the operating system generates a specialized ICMP echo request packet.
And this packet traverses the network infrastructure, completely bypassing the complex TCP and UDP transport protocols, and ignores the application layer entirely.
It strikes the destination machine's network stack directly.
Directly at layer 3.
Yes. Upon receiving the echo request, the destination device's operating system kernel is compelled to pause, reverse the source and destination IP addresses in the packet header, and immediately transmit an ICMP echo reply packet back to the originating machine.
And then the originating machine calculates the exact round-trip transit time in milliseconds. If you receive that reply, you have mathematically proven that the physical cabling, the layer 2 framing, and the layer 3 routing logic are functioning perfectly in both directions.
But what occurs when the ICMP echo request vanishes into the void, and the command simply times out? The engineer knows the packet died, but they have no idea where the execution occurred in a network containing 50 different routers.
This limitation is exactly why the traceroute command is fundamentally necessary. How does traceroute actually find the exact router?
Traceroute leverages a brilliant manipulation of the IP packet header, specifically a field known as the time to live, or TTL value. The TTL is actually designed to prevent routing loops from circulating packets infinitely forever.
Okay, so every time an IP packet passes through a router, referred to as a hop, the router must mathematically decrement the TTL value by 1.
Right, and if the TTL value reaches 0, the router is obligated to drop the packet entirely and send an ICMP time-exceeded message back to the original sender.
Ah, so that is the mechanic that powers traceroute. The engineer's machine sends the first probe packet with a TTL intentionally set to exactly 1.
Precisely. The packet hits the very first router in the path. The router decrements the TTL from 1 to 0, drops the packet, and sends back the time-exceeded message.
And the engineer's machine records the IP address of that first router.
Yes. Then it sends a second packet with a TTL of 2. It passes through the first router, hits the second router, the TTL drops to 0, and the second router replies. By systematically incrementing the TTL value, traceroute forces every single router along the path to identify itself.
Mapping the entire network topology hop by hop. If the connection consistently fails at the 7th hop, the engineer instantly knows that router number 7 is the exact location of the failure,
which allows them to isolate their diagnostic efforts immediately. This provides intense visibility into the known routing path.
But what about the unknown entities residing on the infrastructure? Network scanning and discovery tools like Nmap, the network mapper, are critical for finding devices the NOC didn't deploy.
Right. Automated network discovery is a foundational security and troubleshooting requirement. Nmap performs aggressive network layer scans, systematically sweeping entire IP address subnets with specialized probe packets to identify responsive hosts.
And it analyzes the specific characteristics of the replies to fingerprint the operating system right, identifying exactly which TCP or UDP ports are open and listening for connections.
Exactly. And the business justification for continuous Nmap scanning ties directly into mitigating corporate liability, specifically regarding shadow IT.
Shadow IT being unauthorized, unvetted technology deployed by employees without IT approval.
Yes. Consider an employee who brings an unpatched consumer-grade wireless router from home and plugs it directly into the Ethernet wall jack in an executive conference room, simply to improve their smartphone's Wi-Fi signal.
Oh man. That action immediately bypasses the organization's entire multi-million-dollar perimeter firewall and intrusion prevention architecture. They have unknowingly created an unsecured backdoor directly into the internal corporate LAN.
Exactly. Continuous automated network discovery scans are designed to detect the anomalous UMC address and the unauthorized DHCP broadcast of that rogue router the moment it connects.
Allowing the NOC to instantly disable the physical switch port before an external attacker discovers the vulnerability.
Right. And once we verify the inventory of authorized devices, we must ensure they are hardened against exploitation. This requires the deployment of vulnerability assessment scanners, such as Nessus, OpenVAS, or Rapid7's Insight VM.
We really need to distinguish how these platforms differ from simple antivirus software.
Antivirus reacts to known malicious code executing on a machine. Vulnerability scanners proactively analyze the static condition of the operating system and the installed software landscape.
The scanner connects to the IT asset and performs an exhaustive inventory of the registry keys, the installed applications, the current configuration parameters, and the exact patch levels of the OS.
It then cross-references that immense data set against global threat repositories, specifically the National Vulnerability Database, the NVD, and the Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures, or CVE, lists.
And the output is a highly detailed prioritized matrix. The scanner will identify that a specific backend database server is running a deprecated version of Apache Web Server software, which is missing a critical security patch released 3 months ago.
Which exposes the organization to a well-documented remote code execution vulnerability. It provides the NOC with the precise intelligence required to remediate the flaw before a threat actor weaponizes it.
We must establish a strict boundary here for the executive listener regarding tooling capabilities. What is the fundamental operational difference between a vulnerability scanner, which we just analyzed, and a protocol analyzer, which represents the deepest level of troubleshooting?
It's a great question. A vulnerability scanner assesses the static architectural condition of the machine itself. It identifies missing locks on the doors. It absolutely does not possess the capability to analyze the live, real-time data flowing across the network cables.
So a protocol analyzer, conversely, captures and dissects the dynamic conversations happening on the wire at a microscopic level. It watches the actual entities walking through the hallways.
Exactly. To achieve comprehensive visibility, an enterprise must heavily invest in both methodologies.
Watching those hallways requires us to dive into the most complex aspect of this entire deep dive: protocol analysis and behavior. As we established earlier, without protocol analysis, troubleshooting essentially hits a brick wall at layer 2 or layer 3.
Right. You can prove the hardware is connected, and you can prove the routing path is open, but you cannot see the dialogue. Protocol analyzers, with Wireshark being the most ubiquitous open-source standard in the industry, physically capture the raw data link layer frames and network layer packets in real time.
They decode the incredibly complex hexadecimal protocol structures and translate them into a human-readable sequence of source and destination communications.
But deploying Wireshark effectively in an enterprise environment requires specialized hardware. You cannot simply install the software on a laptop, plug it into a random wall port, and expect to see all the traffic traversing the core data center switches.
Because modern switches isolate traffic, they do not broadcast every packet to every port. So to capture the necessary data without inducing latency, the NOC must deploy physical network taps.
Yes, a tap is a dedicated hardware appliance inserted directly in line between two critical network nodes, such as a core switch and the primary firewall.
Right. For fiber optic connections, a passive optical tap utilizes microscopic beam splitters to physically duplicate the photons traveling through the glass.
A percentage of the light continues to the destination, and a percentage is diverted to the protocol analyzer. The network hardware is completely unaware that TAP even exists.
It silently copies every single frame, unaltered, and forwards it to the monitoring system, providing perfect, legally defensible packet capture for forensic troubleshooting and security analysis.
Exactly. And once we are capturing the raw hexadecimal data via the TAP, Wireshark translates it, allowing the engineer to observe the mechanics of network behavior. The sources highlight the necessity of understanding Ethernet MAC addressing at this stage.
Specifically categorizing traffic into unicast, multicast, and broadcast frames. Let's break down the mechanical differences and the business implications of each.
Sure. Unicast is the standard one-to-one communication model. A specific client machine transmits an Ethernet frame destined for the unique MAC address of a single specific server.
Okay, and multicast.
Multicast operates on a one-to-many paradigm. A single source transmits a frame destined for a specialized multicast group address. Only the specific host devices that have explicitly subscribed to that multicast group receive and process the payload.
Which is highly optimized for scenarios like synchronized financial market data feeds or high-definition video streaming.
Right. And finally, we have broadcast traffic, which is a one-to-all communication model. A frame is transmitted using the universal destination MAC address of FF, 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 FFF, FF, FF.
The rules of Ethernet dictate that every single device residing on that local network segment must immediately halt its current processing, accept the broadcast frame, and analyze the payload to determine if the message requires a response.
Yes, and understanding the distinction between these three addressing methods is critical for an executive managing corporate events.
Consider a scenario where the chief executive officer is delivering a live, high-definition video address to 6,000 employees globally. If the streaming server is misconfigured to utilize unicast addressing, what happens?
Well, the server must independently generate and transmit 6,000 completely identical parallel video streams. The sheer volume of redundant data will instantly overwhelm the server's network interface card.
Saturate the outbound bandwidth, create a massive choke point at the core switch, and collapse the entire network.
Exactly. It transforms an executive address into a catastrophic denial-of-service attack initiated by the company itself.
Yikes. Conversely, if the infrastructure is properly configured for multicast routing, the server generates a single high-definition video stream.
And as that stream traverses the network, the specialized multicast-enabled routers and switches dynamically duplicate the packets only at the specific junctures where the network path diverges to reach the subscribed endpoints.
The protocol analyzer will immediately reveal whether the network is collapsing under the weight of 6,000 unicast streams or efficiently managing a single multicast feed.
Right. Protocol analysis also exposes the counterintuitive realities of the Internet Protocol itself. Our earlier discussion established TCP as the guarantor of reliability, but the sources explicitly state that IP, operating at layer 3, is connectionless.
It relies on best effort delivery and, crucially, does not utilize any form of acknowledgement.
That is an accurate assessment of the protocol's mechanics. At layer 3, IP's sole responsibility is routing. It encapsulates the payload, affixes the source and destination IP addresses, and forwards the packet to the next router.
IP possesses absolutely no mechanism to verify if the packet successfully reached the destination, nor does it possess any capability to retransmit a corrupted packet.
None at all.
To a layperson, building the entire global internet on a protocol that simply fires data blindly and hopes for the best seems incredibly reckless. If IP doesn't care about reliability, why isn't the internet just a chaotic void of dropped data?
The reliability is achieved through the architectural brilliance of the TCP/IP stack's division of labor. As we detailed, TCP assumes the entire burden of reliability at layer 4.
TCP executes the handshakes, tracks the sequence numbers, demands the acknowledgments, and forces the retransmissions.
Exactly. By strictly offloading the computationally heavy burden of reliability to TCP, the architecture allows IP at layer 3 to remain incredibly lightweight, fast, and aggressively efficient at its only job.
Which is finding the shortest path to the destination network. It's an elegant separation of duties. While analyzing these packet flows, engineers must frequently investigate the Address Resolution Protocol, or ARP.
Yes. We mentioned ARP earlier as the bridge between logical and physical routing. Let's examine the exact mechanism of an ARP transaction and why a misconfigured ARP cache paralyzes a network.
The fundamental rule of local area networking is that IP addresses dictate the logical destination, but switches require physical MC addresses to actually forward the Ethernet frames across the copper wires.
Right, so when a host machine needs to transmit a packet to an IP address on its local subnet, it must determine the corresponding MEC address of that specific target. It initiates this by examining its internal ARP cache table.
A dynamic memory bank mapping known IP addresses to MSE addresses. If the mapping does not exist in the cache, the machine is forced to actively interrogate the network. It generates an ARP request packet.
Crucially, this request is sent as a Layer 2 broadcast. The machine essentially shouts to every single device on the subnet, will the device possessing the IP address 192.168.1.50 please identify yourself and provide your physical MSE address.
Every device on the subnet receives the broadcast, but only the machine assigned that specific IP address generates an ARP reply.
Yes. The reply is sent via a direct unicast frame back to the requester, containing the highly sought-after MSC address. The originating machine immediately stores this mapping in its ARP cache for future use.
The critical vulnerability lies in the relationship between the host's ARP table and the IP default gateway router. If a host's ARP table becomes corrupted, perhaps associating the router's IP address with the MSC address of a dead switch port, what happens?
Every outbound packet the host generates will be transmitted into a physical black hole. The logical IP routing is perfect, but the physical delivery mechanism is fundamentally broken.
And protocol analyzers are the only tools capable of capturing those ARP broadcasts and proving the cache is poisoned. Beyond the foundational routing protocols, the sources emphasize the necessity of analyzing Windows client-server protocols.
Specifically highlighting Microsoft Active Directory, or AD Active Directory, is the central nervous system of enterprise identity management.
It is the database that identifies, authenticates, and authorizes every domain user, every computer policy, and every access right across the LAN.
Right. When an engineer utilizes Wireshark to monitor Active Directory communications over the local area network, the critical protocol they're dissecting is LDAP, the Lightweight Directory Access Protocol.
LDAP is the complex conversational language utilized by client machines to query the directory services and securely transmit authentication credentials to the domain controllers.
If the LD key traffic flow is interrupted, blocked by an internal firewall misconfiguration, or suffering from severe packet loss, employees will be physically locked out of their workstations, entirely unable to authenticate.
Now, a critical point regarding visibility. The actual passwords transmitted within the LDP payload are, or absolutely should be, heavily encrypted. A protocol analyzer cannot decrypt that payload without the private keys.
True. However, the analyzer doesn't need to read the password to identify the fault.
Exactly. The value of the protocol analyzer is in exposing the sequence and the state of the conversation. The analyzer will reveal that a client machine successfully initiated the TCP three-way handshake with the domain controller, transmitted the LDP bind request containing the encrypted authentication data, and then waited.
The analyzer definitively proves that the domain controller simply stopped communicating and failed to return the LDAP bind response. The engineer immediately knows the network transport is functioning, but the Active Directory service on the server has critically stalled or crashed.
We have established the workflows, the physical tools, the statistical baselines, and the microscopic protocol behaviors. Now, we must transition this theoretical foundation into operational execution.
Yes. We are applying this architecture to actual executive-level crisis scenarios. Let's step into the war room and analyze the forensic response to catastrophic failures.
This is the environment where theoretical knowledge dictates the survival of the enterprise infrastructure. Scenario 1. The rogue DHCP server. We briefly defined the dynamic host configuration protocol earlier.
It is the automated system that provisions devices with the necessary IP configurations when they connect to the network.
The DORA process defines DHCP functionality, right?
Yes. When a laptop connects to the corporate Wi-Fi, it broadcasts a DHCP discover packet. The authorized corporate DHCP server replies with an offer packet proposing an IP address. The laptop sends a request packet accepting the offer, and the server finalizes the transaction with an acknowledgement packet.
This process assigns the device a valid IP address, the correct subnet mask, the IP address of the default gateway router, and the IP addresses of the DNS servers.
Right, so in our crisis scenario, the NOC monitoring dashboard explodes with anomaly alerts. A rogue, completely unauthorized DHCP server has materialized on the internal network.
It is intercepting the Discover broadcasts from legitimate corporate devices and rapidly handing out conflicting, non-allocated IP address space information. What is the operational reality of this event, and how must the executive team coordinate the response?
Well, while it is theoretically possible that an untested software patch caused a secondary server to inadvertently activate the DHCP service, the executive team must operate under the assumption that a malicious actor has intentionally deployed a rogue DHCP server.
Perhaps a microcomputer hidden under a desk directly onto the physical network.
Exactly. The objective is not simply to disrupt connectivity. The objective is to execute a devastating man-in-the-middle attack.
Let's break down the mechanics of how that attack actually works. It relies entirely on a race condition, doesn't it?
Precisely. The rogue server is designed to respond to the client's Discover broadcast faster than the legitimate, heavily loaded corporate server. The rogue server offers a valid IP address, but it subtly alters a critical parameter. It assigns its own IP address as the default gateway router.
The client machine accepts the configuration. From that microsecond forward, every single piece of external data generated by that user, every email, every authenticated database query, every web request is physically transmitted directly to the hacker's machine.
Yes, the hacker's machine silently captures a copy of the packets using protocol analysis tools and then seamlessly forwards the traffic to the actual default gateway, completely masking the interception.
The user remains completely unaware their traffic is being siphoned. This scenario dictates that a rogue DHCP server is not an IT outage. It is an active critical security breach. The managerial response cannot be a casual request for a systems administrator to reboot a server.
No, the response requires immediate aggressive containment. The NOC must instantly deploy protocol analyzers to capture the rogue DHCP, offer packets, identify the unauthorized MAC address, trace it through the switch cam tables, and physically shut down the specific switch port the device is connected to.
Furthermore, because a man-in-the-middle attack has occurred, the incident transitions from troubleshooting to digital forensics. The executive team must engage legal counsel and compliance officers immediately, as the organization now faces a potential chain of custody issue regarding compromised client data or intellectual property.
The technical failure instantly becomes a massive corporate liability.
Let's examine a different vector of catastrophic failure. Scenario 2. DNS failure, the domain name system. In this scenario, the enterprise network is fully powered. Link integrity is solid. The core routers are passing traffic perfectly. But suddenly, every web browser in the building throws a server not found error. Internal systems cannot resolve the host names of the central databases. What is the mechanical breakdown occurring here?
The domain name system is the distributed database responsible for translating human-readable host names, such as a vendor's website or an internal intranet portal, into the precise numerical IP addresses that the routers actually require to forward the packets.
When a user enters a URL, the machine generates a DNS query to the primary DNS server.
The server utilizes a complex hierarchy of recursive and iterative lookups to locate the IP address and returns it to the client. If the systems cannot resolve host names, the most probable diagnosis is that the network path to the primary and secondary DNS servers is completely severed, or the DNS service itself has crashed.
I conceptualize DNS failure by equating it to the sudden evaporation of a city's navigation system. The physical destination buildings, the IP addresses, are still structurally sound. The road network connecting them, the routers and switches, is completely free of traffic.
But every single driver has lost their map, and nobody knows the numerical coordinates of where they are trying to go.
Exactly. The infrastructure is technically flawless, but functionally entirely useless.
That analogy perfectly illustrates the business impact. From an executive perspective, a catastrophic DNS failure is an indictment of the organization's capacity planning and architectural redundancy.
Foundational network services require absolute high availability. A single point of failure for DNS is an unacceptable operational risk.
Best practices mandate that if the primary DNS server fails, a secondary, fully synchronized DNS server, ideally residing on an entirely different physical subnet, utilizing a separate power grid or hosted in a geographically distinct cloud environment, must seamlessly intercept the queries.
If the NOC is rigorously conducting capacity planning and architectural audits, this vulnerability should have been identified and mitigated through active redundancy long before it caused a systemic outage.
Exactly right.
This analysis circles us back to the stark reality presented in our opening hook. When the enterprise network goes completely dark on the busiest day of the quarter, it only results in a catastrophic business disaster if the organization lacks the internal discipline, the established NOC workflows, and the microscopic protocol visibility required to systematically isolate the severed cable, the rogue server, or the overwhelmed hardware buffer immediately.
That is the ultimate strategic takeaway from this final chapter. Effective network troubleshooting is categorically not a reactive ad hoc IT function. It is a highly proactive, structured executive discipline.
It relies on the financial commitment to rigorous capacity planning, the mathematical establishment of dynamic performance baselines, and a methodical, unyielding adherence to layer-by-layer diagnostic visibility achieved through the OSI model and advanced protocol analysis.
Well said.
It has been a genuinely incredible, comprehensive journey. We are officially celebrating the conclusion of this 15-episode masterclass on telecommunications for managers. We began the series exploring the fundamental physics of analog communication, and we have traversed the entire spectrum to conclude with complex protocol analysis, encrypted packet capture, and layered enterprise security architectures.
It has been an exhaustive exploration of the critical technologies and the overarching strategic frameworks that dictate the survival and success of the modern digital enterprise.
To everyone listening, I want to reiterate our initial recommendation. Please like, subscribe, and share this deep dive. Ensure you access the description below for the links to the extensive corporate resources, the advanced architecture diagrams, and the required technical reading we have referenced throughout the series.
There is so much value in those resources.
Absolutely. And although this specific 15-part masterclass is concluding, your professional development must continuously evolve. I strongly encourage all corporate managers, IT directors, and operations executives to thoroughly review our channel for additional enterprise IT playlists, advanced training videos, and continuous professional education modules.
We are constantly, actively developing advanced content.
Yes. Specifically, keep an eye out for our upcoming digital forensics deep dive, as well as an extensive, highly technical exploration into network and systems security. Thank you for committing your time and focus to this entire journey.
When your infrastructure is tested by the unexpected, will your team rely on guesswork or a proven layer-by-layer methodology? Align the strategy, optimize the network. Until next time, keep your business connected, your assets visible, and your infrastructure secure.